Good evening and welcome. My name is Nick Milanetti, and I'm the Executive Director of the Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario. I'd like to welcome and thank everyone for joining us tonight. You're in for a very special treat. We'd like to recognize that we have teachers, parents, directors of education, all of our Catholic partners, and trustees on with us tonight. So thank you very much for joining us. The Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario has been around for almost 50 years. We'll be celebrating that anniversary on October 24th of this year. CEFO recognizes and promotes the distinct contribution of Catholic education to society, recognizes the rights and obligations of parents as first educators, pastoral responsibilities of the Church, and perhaps most importantly, celebrates the accomplishment of educators and students in our Catholic schools. Perhaps best known for our sponsoring of the Father Fogarty Awards each year to celebrate the excellence in our Catholic schools. CEFO also sponsors the awards, the Monk and Carty Awards, that recognize the good works happening in our schools and supporting them through these awards. This year's dinner will take place on October 24th in Toronto at the Delta Marriott at the airport. We will be celebrating our 50th anniversary with a Mass and a reception prior to the Fogarty dinner. His Excellency Bishop Casson will be presiding for the Mass. We will be inviting back all past winners to join us at the Mass celebrated by Bishop Casson. Without further ado, I would like to begin tonight's program and turn it over to our President, Mary Eileen Donovan, to do our prayer and land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Nick. And I want to add my welcome to all of you. I'm just delighted that you could join us this evening. And now let us pray. Let us pray especially at this time for world peace. It is certainly a very unsettling and tumultuous time, and we would like to keep it in prayer always. And of course, we pray for those that we hold close in our families and our communities and their needs. And so we pray, gentle, gracious, and loving God, today as we celebrate this Easter week with joy and gratitude, we also give thanks that we are able to come together as a Catholic community to learn, to grow, and to challenge ourselves. Help us to grow in understanding so that we may focus on the key ethical concerns so that our learning leads us to a more careful and responsible use of artificial intelligence. We call to mind the patron saint of the internet and young people, St. Carlo Acutis. He believed that the internet was a gift from God and that we must use it correctly. He used the internet to spread the gospel and to bring people closer to God. Help us to follow his example in our daily lives. We pray in thanksgiving for the gift of Father Jean Gové, who will be our guide, and for his work in leading and enhancing the knowledge of AI and the ethical considerations as we increasingly adopt this new technology. Let us also pray in gratitude for Catholic education, for all those past and present who have provided and protected it so that we would all benefit from this incredible treasure. Help each of us to act with wisdom and courage so that we may be sources of light and hope for all whom we encounter. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. And our land acknowledgement. The land we walk on belongs to the Creator. Earth does not belong to humanity, but rather humanity is part of the earth. The land was created to be enjoyed by all living beings, a principle reflected in the dish with one spoon covenant. Taking only what we need to preserve our earth for future generations, leaving some for others as a sign of our respect and caring, and keeping it clean by revitalizing the land to sustain generations to come. The Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario office is within the Toronto Catholic District School Board Catholic Education Centre, which is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples. We acknowledge that the territory identified in Treaty 13 belongs to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also heed their prayers to the Creator and respect for the beauty of our Mother Earth, while striving to learn from and draw upon the wisdom of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis traditions. I now invite Laurie DeMarco, a member of our CEFO executive, to introduce our guest speaker, Father Jean Gové. Laurie.
Thank you, Mary Eileen. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario and all of our attendees this evening, it is an honor and a pleasure for me to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker to you this evening. Reverend Dr. Jean Gové is a research affiliate at the AI and Humanity Lab at the University of Hong Kong. His current research is primarily focused on questions relating to cognition and consciousness in AI. He is also engaged in exploring certain ethical aspects of AI tools, such as AI manipulation and wider transhumanist issues. He obtained his PhD in analytical philosophy at the University of St. Andrews. Father Gové is the diocesan coordinator for AI for the Archdiocese of Malta. He is leading initiatives to integrate AI literacy with primary and secondary church schools alongside the setting up of comprehensive formation programs for educators and pastoral workers. To date, such initiatives have reached over 2,000 educators across church, state, and independent schools. The Archdiocese of Malta remains the only entity offering an accredited master's level short course on AI for educators. In January, the Archdiocese became one of the first dioceses to publish an AI ethics position document. Father Gové also currently occupies a number of advisory roles. He is a member of the Maltese government's technical committee exploring potential legislation pertaining to social media use and minors. While abroad, he is the coordinator of the European AI Research Group within the Vatican's Dicastery for Culture and Education, as well as the Holy See's representative at the Council of Europe on matters pertaining to AI. He occasionally guest lectures at the AI department at the University of Malta and will take up a lecturing post at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome next academic year. We've been very excited about this session tonight since we learned of the work that Father has undertaken in artificial intelligence and our relationship with technology from a truly Catholic perspective. As Father is speaking tonight, we encourage you to enter any questions you may have into the comments section on YouTube. Please note that you need to be logged into YouTube to add questions. If you are not able to log into YouTube, please note the email address that is appearing on the screen now, and you can send your questions via email. After Father's talk, Don Walker from the Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario Board of Directors will facilitate a conversation with Father Gové based on the questions you provide in the comments. Father is joining us from Malta, where it is 12:30 a.m. Father, please know how grateful we are to have you with us this evening. And now I turn it over to Reverend Dr. Jean Gové.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Well, it's a very good morning here in Malta at the moment. Happy to be with you all for this presentation. Right. So I'll be honest, I'll start with an admission. I normally give this talk in front of, well, real people. You are all real, but of course I can't see you. So just imagine what your answers would be as I go along. And then I'll be more than happy, as Laurie said, to tackle any questions you might have in the latter part of the presentation. So I'll just get started with the presentation here. Hello, first of all. Yeah, Laurie already gave a bit of a presentation about me. So this would be just by way of saying hi. Maybe something I should say at the beginning is my main background is in philosophy. So I'll be approaching these issues more from a philosophical standpoint, right? So a number of you, if not all of you, come from more of an education background. So I'm sure there will be points of intersection, but maybe I think it's good for us to kind of be aware of the different ways we might all tackle these problems and these issues. So this would be my point here. Maybe one or two other disclaimers, if you will. Secondly, I'd like to also say, just to put it out there, I use these AI tools, right? I use AI. In fact, I think I should use it more. Why am I saying this? In discussions about AI ethics, necessarily, discussions tend to be a bit negative, right? So it's a lot of, don't do this, this is harmful, this is worrying, be aware of that. So it's very easy to convey the message mistakenly, right? That this is something very bad, you shouldn't use it. This is not what I want to convey to you today. So please do not go home or remain at home if you're already at home. Do not go home saying, Father Jean said, never use AI, this is horrible. Not at all. Not at all, right? But of course, in the course of my presentation, I'll be highlighting some negative things, ways in which using these tools might go wrong, just to make you all aware, right? To make you all aware and kind of help you in your journey as teachers, in your pedagogy, as parents also, in realizing how best to use these tools to help us as opposed to harming us, right? Very good. Maybe a third disclaimer I'll give is the presentation has a bit of a journey, right? Which involves making you feel slightly bad at some point and then kind of going towards the light, right? So just, buckle up, if you will. We'll to use a philosophical image, we'll see the abyss for a bit, and then hopefully I can guide you towards the light, towards the latter end of the presentation. So I think that's a sufficient amount of disclaimers to start off. So let's get to it. Right. So what is the aim of this training? Again, I normally direct this to educators primarily. Of course, there are different areas we can tackle this, and again, we can do this in the question period at the end. So I would like us, first of all, to gain a working knowledge of how AI tools function. I don't know you. So I don't know how many of you might be experts in AI or not. So I'd like to just give one or two slides to make sure we are all on the same page when we're talking about AI, right? So that's one thing. Secondly, we'll then understand certain shortcomings inherent in these AI tools. And then I'll focus the majority of the presentation in the second 2 points, right? Hopefully we'll become aware of how these tools affect interpersonal interactions, right? When I say interpersonal interactions, primarily I want to focus on interactions between educators and students and between students themselves, right? Of course, for the parents here who are listening in, you can then kind of think of analogous ways this is also applied, right? And finally, at least, especially for the educators here, but again, this can be generalized in wider ways, will gain the necessary critical skills to go about deciding whether a specific AI tool could be a help or a hindrance in particular situations. As I told you already, my background is philosophy. Philosophy is the art of asking questions. Some people say asking them without actually answering them, but I'll leave that to the side. So the final slide, or one of the final slides, would actually be a list of questions that ideally you will then get to ask yourselves in the various situations you might be in when deciding when, where, and how to use different AI tools, right? Very good. So what we will cover, a bare bones basics of AI, AI as a tool, and the church's position on AI. I don't think I'll cover the practical situations given the time constraints, and I'd much rather have the Q&A between us, right? So what I won't cover, I think this is very good to also manage expectations. First of all, I won't cover everything, right? So necessarily in the time that I have, there'll be things that I leave out, right? So more than happy to then maybe tackle those in the Q&A if you'd like to, yeah. So I also won't be doing tutorials on specific tools, right? So I won't be telling you, for example, how to use ChatGPT, for example, right? Or any other educational AI tool. There are, for a number of reasons, I don't do this. First of all, I think there are people who are much better than me at doing this. Secondly, there are new tools popping up left, right, and center every day. So at times it feels, at least in my opinion, that dedicating too much time to these tutorials might be a bit of a waste, and with better focus on these higher principles. And thirdly, I think there are great availability of tutorials, resources, and training that can be found online, on YouTube, for example, or any other platform that can help you and guide you on how best to use a particular AI tool that you might come about. The other thing I won't cover is anything related to students, meaning how do we educate students on AI? That is another issue, an issue that merits so much research and discussion and reflection. So today I really want to focus it on you as educators or as parents, in a sense also educators, right? And how you can use these tools in the best way in order to ensure that education, the process of education, maintains its main aim, right? Which is the holistic formation of students, of children. Very good. Normally, as I go along, I say, feel free to ask questions if you want to clarify. So unfortunately, I can't do that today. But yeah, we'll trust the process and we'll see. Very good. So yeah. So let's start with AI. What is AI? Maybe some of you, right? And again, there might be a number of AI professionals or executives in the audience. So I apologize. You just have to power through the next 2 or 3 slides, which are going to be very obvious for you. But for the rest of you, I think it's good that we get on the same page. A number of you might have heard of AI for the first time when ChatGPT was rolled out into the public stage. That was November 2022. Right? So already, about 4 years ago, almost. But AI as a technology has been around for a long time, right? So 1956 is the year when the term was coined in what is now called the Dartmouth workshop conference that happened in Dartmouth. So this technology was steadily kind of, being formed. Obviously, as happens in every other technology, as time progresses, the technology becomes better, cheaper to produce, more efficient. The same thing happened with phones, right? First phones were massive, bulky things, very expensive. Today, people have 1, 2 phones, right? And they're very cheap, and everyone has access to them, or a lot of people have access to them. So the same kind of thing happened with AI. So as you know, I'm a researcher, so I do very, very, very rigorous research. And that there is my research on Wikipedia, right? Best place to start. Normally there's a chuckle in the audience, right? But I can't hear you. So that is the first sentence on Wikipedia. AI is the intelligence of machines or software as opposed to the intelligence of humans or other animals. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you, right? I hate this definition with a passion, right? And I hate this definition precisely because I feel that it really serves to confuse us more than to help us, right? So I think a better way for us to understand what AI is not to compare AI to human beings, right? But rather to compare AI to other technology, right? So let's leave humans or other animals outside of the equation. And I want you now to think of 2 pieces of technology. So there I give you an example. So think of a calculator, a random calculator that you used to use at school, and think of a self-driving car. One of these 2 tools uses AI, the other one doesn't. You don't get any points for guessing which one is which, right? So how are these 2 pieces of technology similar? Both of them make use of computer languages, right? So somebody, a team, a company had to program the tool to work the way it works, right? They had to code. Some of you might teach computer science coding. Some of you might have studied it themselves, right? Or your children, or yeah. So there was this process of putting these components together and then programming them to function the way they do. So this is how they're similar. Both tools, the calculator, the self-driving car, make use of algorithms, right? So people sometimes panic and start to shudder as soon as they hear this word. Do not worry, right? What is an algorithm? An algorithm is a recipe. That is all it is, right? So I could give you an algorithm right now. If the door to the room where you're in right now is open, then switch off your TV. If the door where you're in right now is closed, switch on the TV, right? I gave you a set of instructions. That is an algorithm, right? So obviously, algorithms become much more complicated, much more complex. When we speak of AI tools, these are very, very complex algorithms, right? So this is the way in which these two tools, the calculator, the self-driving car, are similar. Now, how are they different? This is where the magic, if you will, right, the wow of AI comes into play, right? So non-AI systems, like the calculator, follow what we call predefined deterministic rules. So let me give an example, right? So if you get a calculator right now and you type in 12 times 12, you'll get the answer of 144. If I ask all of you to keep on trying that out for the duration of my presentation, one would hope that you would always get 144, right? There's a predefined deterministic answer, right? There's only one answer that's good. Think of any other tool you have at home that doesn't use AI, right? So for example, washing machines, right? My washing machine was on yesterday. My washing machine has 10 settings. I only use 2 or 3 of those. When I choose one of those settings, the washing machine does the same thing. It could be full, it could be empty, the clothes could be very dirty or not dirty at all. If I give it a 1-hour cycle, it follows the same set of instructions, right? It follows, once again, a predefined deterministic algorithm set of rules. Now, let's imagine we had to use that same sort of reasoning for the self-driving car, right? We have to think how this car is going to drive in Toronto, how it's going to drive in Malta, how it's going to drive in London, Ontario, how it's going to drive in Hong Kong, how it's going to drive in New York, right? How it's going to drive if it's raining, if it's dark, if it's foggy, if it's snowing, how it's going to drive if a cat had to, very unexpectedly cross the road. There are so many different situations that the self-driving car finds itself in. It is practically impossible for an individual, a team, a company to think beforehand, right? The situations that car would be in order to set these predefined deterministic rules, right? It's impossible. This is where AI comes in, right? So AI systems, generally speaking, right? Now, I'll bracket this a little bit. There are many different types and flavors of AI, right? So I'm just giving you kind of the broad brush, so to speak, just for us to get this presentation off the ground, right? The key word you need to think whenever you hear AI is probability. If you have this word in your mind, you know what AI does, right? So let's use this example. The self-driving car is given a set of probabilistic rules. If it's raining, most probably the roads will be slippery. Most probably it will take longer to come to a stop, to brake, right? So I should drive a bit slower, you see? So probably I should drive a bit slower. If it's dark, if something were to cross in front of the car, there wouldn't be sufficient time to see it. Therefore, probably the car should drive a bit slower, right? So probably. Let's apply that same reasoning to large language models, right? So tools like ChatGPT. I could ask ChatGPT, give me a poem in the style of, I normally give Maltese poets, examples of Maltese poets. So let me think. A sonnet in the style of Shakespeare about CEFO, right? The Catholic Education Foundation of Ontario, right? So we all know that Shakespeare hasn't written a sonnet about CEFO. I asked ChatGPT to do this, and ChatGPT does it, right? So how does that happen? Probability. Once again, ChatGPT, within its memory, within its training data, has all the information, all the data about Shakespeare's sonnets. It also has the information that's presumably on the internet about CEFO, right? So it just thinks, I'll get to what I mean by this. It thinks, well, probably a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare about CEFO looks something like this, right? Probability is the key, right? So pattern recognition, predictions, this is all based on probability. If you know this one word, you know like the essential stuff there is to do regarding AI. So I'm hoping that this is enough, right? And we've all gotten it just enough for us to kind of proceed with the rest of the presentation. But again, we can, more than happy to answer questions at the end. So I did this when I said, ChatGPT thinks, right? So this is the area that really interests me from philosophy, but I won't dwell on this because this would take us forever. And this topic of whether ChatGPT actually thinks or reasons or feels is a topic much more enjoyed with a glass of wine, I think. Yeah. So for now, I'll just say this: whenever we use these verbs, it's thinking, it's confused, it's hallucinating, it remembers, it's kind. We always use these words in a metaphorical sense. And I'm not saying this because I'm a priest or because of this is what the church says. This is, at the moment, the predominant philosophical opinion on the matter, right? Does ChatGPT think and feel and love you and care for you? At the moment, the unanimous or just about unanimous view is that no, right? These tools are just giving you an answer based on probability, right? Now, will this remain the case? We're not sure. Some people say no, some people say yes, but at the moment, this is the case. And if you'd like to look further on into this, I invite you to look online at the Turing test and what's called the Chinese room. This is a thought experiment which was thought up by a philosopher called John Searle in 1980, I want to say, which is basically a thought experiment just to kind of help us realize that just because the machine seems to be understanding what we're writing, what we're saying, seems to be able to carry on a meaningful conversation, doesn't mean it's actually understanding the content of that conversation, right? So I'll just leave that there, for what it is. And again, we can circle back to this later on, right? So you might tell me, Father Jean, I have never used ChatGPT, ergo, I have never used AI, all right? At which point I might see you taking up your phone and scrolling to through your phone, right? So I have news for you. AI is now all around us, right? So if you use any virtual assistants like Siri or Alexa, you're using AI, right? If you use anything that recommends stuff to you, your Netflix, your Spotify, your Facebook, your Instagram, your TikTok, your YouTube, right? This is, again, AI. Image or speech recognition, right? So for example, some of you, like me, might use your face to unlock your phone, your Face ID, right? That is an example of AI, right? So think about it. You bought your phone, you took a couple of photos of your face, and then at 2 a.m., when it's dark and you scrunched up in bed, it recognizes that it's you, right? The machine reasons, probably this is Jean, right? From the photos I have of Jean, probably this is Jean, right? Natural language processing, so ChatGPT is an example. Areas of decision making, so for example, in finance and in health, we already have a number of massive companies, hospitals, for example, insurances, banks, that use AI tools, for example, to decide whether someone is eligible for a mortgage or to vet, for example, x-rays, right? So AI is present all around us, right? Good. So obviously I need to zoom in. Maybe I think it'll be, we have to kind of focus on examples like ChatGPT. So I'll just say a word here about nomenclature. A lot of us use the words, use ChatGPT, right? So let me just say something here. So the best way I found to explain this is to use the analogy of cars, right? So we have cars that exist. We have different brands of cars, right? You have, I don't know what, you have Ford, you have BMW, you have Mercedes. I hope these are not ads that I'm doing. And then each brand of car, each make, produces different models, right? Different models that come out year on year. The same thing is present within this sphere of AI. Instead of cars, we have what we call large language models, LLMs, right? Of which we have a number of famous brands. Within this field, we don't have many famous brands. We just have maybe 4 or 5, right? Majority of which are American, right? So we have ChatGPT, which is owned by OpenAI, Gemini, which is owned by Google. We have Claude, which is owned by Anthropic. Some of you might mention Copilot. That is not a good answer. Why? Because Copilot runs on ChatGPT as an engine, right? Good. There are maybe 3 or 4, 2 or 3 others, but I think you get the gist of what I'm talking about at the moment. Right. Now, let me just zoom in on ChatGPT, and I'll tell you why. There's a video I want to show you. And so I mentioned that different models come out. At the moment, if I'm not mistaken, the latest ChatGPT model is GPT 5.2, right? GPT 4.0 is a model that came out in, let me remember exactly, May 2024. So this is almost going on to 2 years now, right? So this is within the world of AI. This is the Jurassic period, right? 2 years ago, at the rate of speed of AI. This is a long time ago. And there's a video I'd like to show you. So I'll ask Carmela to show you the video now. This video is an advert that OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT, launched when it ran GPT 4.0. It's a short video. It's like a 3 or 4 minute video. You'll see the video. The video is basically a father, a son. The son is the boy in white, yeah. And the son is writing on an iPad, which you can see in 1/3 of the screen. That iPad has a Pythagoras problem, and the black circle you'll see soon is ChatGPT, right? So it's a 3 or 4 minute video. Like I said, this is an ad that they put out. So I just want you to watch the video, and then we'll discuss it afterwards.
OpenAI invited myself and my son Imran here to try out some of their new technology. And so we're curious about how good it might be at tutoring someone in math on Khan Academy. So let's get it started. It's loading up. All right, make sure it can see our screen.
Actually, in this format,
Hello there. I'm here with my son, and I'd love you to tutor him on this math problem, but don't give him the answer. You can ask questions and nudge him in the right direction, but I really want to make sure he understands it himself. And he's here in the room, so you can talk to him directly.
Of course, I'd be happy to help. Let's look at the problem together. Can you first identify which sides of the triangle are the opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse relative to angle alpha?
All right, so I'm pretty sure this is the angle alpha right here, right?
Perfect. That's correct. Now, looking at the triangle, which side do you think is the hypotenuse?
Really,
Remember the hypotenuse?
I'm not totally sure. I think it might be this one, but I really am not sure. This side AC.
You're close. Actually, side AC is called the adjacent side to the angle alpha. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right triangle and is directly opposite the right angle. Can you find which one is the hypotenuse?
Oh, okay, I see. So I think the hypotenuse is this really long side from A to B. Would that be correct?
Exactly. Well done. Now that you've identified the hypotenuse, can you identify which side is the opposite side to angle alpha?
Okay, well, I mean, you told me earlier that this was the adjacent side, and I know that's the hypotenuse, so I'm guessing that this side, BC, is the opposite side.
Great deduction. That's absolutely correct. Now that you've identified all the sides relative to angle alpha, do you remember the formula for finding the sine of an angle in a right triangle?
Yeah, I know that the sine is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse.
Perfect. That's absolutely right. Now, can you apply that formula to find sine alpha in the triangle using the lengths of the sides that we've identified?
Okay, so, I mean, you told me that 7, this side BC, is the opposite side. And then you said that the hypotenuse is the longest side, so that would be this side AB, which is 25. So would the answer be 7 over 25?
Excellent work. That's correct. Sine alpha equals 7 over 25. You did a great job identifying the sides and using the sine formula. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask.
So at this point, it would be fantastic if I could see your faces. right? Because normally when I meet teachers in schools, there's a mix of teachers, half of whom say this is the future of education, and the other half who are saying this the future of education. So this is kind of a question. I kind of showed this video because even though it's fairly old, like I said, it's about 2 years now. Not everyone would have seen it, and I kind of feel it kind of brings out something a bit unsettling in a lot of us. There's something weird going on. We see the tool, we see ChatGPT answering in a very human way, very, very encouraging, with the M, with the well done, with the not quite, you're close, kind of these cadences, these expressions that sound very, very human. Just enough, I think I can also just let you know, this was in the news, that September of the previous scholastic year, not this scholastic year, right? So September, once again, 24, London, Great Britain, in this case, London, Great Britain, opened its first teacherless school. So I think apart from the physical education teacher, the school had no teachers. The school was just kind of this sort of tool for students, right? So I might think, okay, how do we draw the line? Is it good? Is it bad? How can we proceed, right? And this is what I would like to do. This is the moment where, as I'm telling you, or as I told you rather, we'll start to feel a little bit bad, right? But bear with me. Right, so normally here I ask teachers a question and I say, AI is just a tool. Do you agree or do you not agree with this question? Now, I can't see you. I'm going to imagine that half of you, if not more than half, I would eventually say more than half, would say, yes, AI is just a tool, right? And, it's good or bad depending on how you use it, right? And I want to say, no, there's a wrong answer, right? Why? So let's unpack that. So first of all, those of you who thought, yes, it's just a tool, you are in good company. Aristotle, right? So somewhat intelligent, somewhat wise, right? Aristotle thought something very similar. Why? Aristotle had this argument about knives, about a knife, right? So he said, look, knives are tools. A knife is a good knife or a bad knife, depending on whether it's sharp or blunt. Morally speaking, the tool is neutral. It's good or bad, depending on how you use it. Depending on how the user uses it. If the user uses the knife to cook or to harm somebody, right? So far so good. But the problem is here, right? When we talk of tools that are more and more technologically complex, this argument of moral neutrality kind of fades away. We can't speak of the tool as being morally neutral, right? There are all these questions we have to ask, right? So let's think of guns, for example, right? Obviously, guns are a type of tool that is much more complex than a knife. I can make a blade by hitting two rocks against each other, right? But a gun, I don't throw some metal pieces, scraps on the floor, and the gun is formed. So, there are less things I could do with a gun. We can think of more and more complex tools, right? And the argument kind of keeps on going up until AI, right? So, as a bracket here, I think we should also clarify something. I will now stop talking about AI. What do I mean? We can't keep on talking about AI in the air as some, massive abstract thing. Talking about whether AI is good or bad is as useful as talking about whether electricity is good or bad, or energy is good or bad. We now have to speak of AI tools, right? So ChatGPT is an AI tool. Facebook is an AI tool, right? Now the questions I'll start showing you, these are the first two questions that I'll deal, right? I'll present to you. Have to apply to specific AI tools. You might be using the internet and come across a particular AI tool that you think you might use in your pedagogy. You now ask these questions. Is this AI tool good or bad, right, to use? These questions, I would hope, will give you the answer, right, to this question of whether this AI tool is good or bad, and whether I should or should not use it, and in which context, right? Good. So let's start with the first two questions, right? These are very easy questions. The harder ones come further on, right? What is the tool's goal and how does the tool function, right? So these are some stock examples that I give. So for example, I'm at a school, we don't have enough supply teachers, right? And we realized we could actually install CCTV cameras in classrooms, or else if students have like laptops, we could use the webcam on the laptops just to make sure, students remain safe. They don't need to have supervision by a teacher, because we can have this tool, this AI tool that makes sure all the students are safe. And there's maybe somebody in the principal's office, and as soon as maybe a student, the AI tool system rings a bell or sounds an alarm, we know that this particular student would maybe have a problem, and a teacher would be dispatched, right? So what is the tool's goal here? Already we have to ask the first question, right? Surveillance. So already there, right off the bat, we might start asking some questions, right? Is it okay for us to deploy AI tools within schools where surveillance is involved? Do we want students to grow up in an environment where they feel that they're constantly watched, right? So that's already the first ethical question that we should ask. And already there, by this that we're doing, this particular tool, hypothetical tool that I'm imagining, is already thrown out of the window, right? So let's imagine, for example, a teacher has found another tool that can help them with marking, with assessments. And you realize you're using this tool, you realize this tool gives me really detailed, personalized feedback. Fantastic, right? And then I dig deeper into how the tool functions, and I realize the tool gives me this AI assessment marking tool, gives me this really personalized, detailed feedback, because the tool accesses the data that the school has about the student, information about the student from other subjects or from previous academic years. Maybe depending on the age of the student, the tool might also be accessing information about the student from social media or from the internet. And it uses all that information to create a personalized, really unique feedback, right? Now, what is the tool's goal? Tool's goal is providing feedback and assessment. In and of itself, not particularly harmful, not particularly worrying, right? Even though we might want to discuss that further. How does the tool function? We already realize, describing, as I've described the tool, that this tool has massive problematic issues with regards to data collection and privacy, right? So already there, second line, we have to stop and think, this is really not a good tool to use, right? So already, right, I'd like you to start kind of going into this perspective of asking these questions. You find a tool, it looks shiny, it looks great. Obviously, the people who create the tool want you to use the tool. I really want us all to start kind of getting into this habit of, if you will, interrogating kind of the tool, interrogating ourselves rather about the tool to see whether it's good or bad to use, right? So there are other issues there. Normally, I take a pause here and ask teachers or even parents at the moment, I'll ask them, what is the goal of a tool like Facebook, right? So Facebook is a social media platform. It also uses a lot of AI through its recommendation. What is the goal of this tool? And some teachers still tell me the goal is to make friends or to get connected. I apologize for bursting your bubble. Mr. Zuckerberg does not go to bed at night very happy that 20 million new friends have been made. Mr. Zuckerberg goes to bed at night happy that he has made more money, right? So the goal of this tool of Facebook is to make money, right, to the company. How does it do that? Primarily by two ways: showing you adverts, right, and using your data and your information. Very good. Now, hypothetically speaking, if I spend 1 hour on Facebook, I see a number of ads, amount of data is taken from me, and an amount of revenues generated for Facebook, right? So the company and all other social media platforms have the same model, wants me to spend more time using the platform, right? If I can spend 2, 3, 6, 10 hours using Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, as opposed to just one, I generate more revenue for the company, right? As a brackets here, an adage which some of you might know, maybe not all of you, is if you're using something for free on the internet, You are the product, right? Remember that. If you're using something for free on the internet, you are the product. So therefore, how does the tool function? The tool functions by engagement. Facebook, all these apps show you content that you engage with. I want to highlight this. They don't show you content that you like necessarily. They show you content that you engage with, right? So let me use a very simple example, I hope. I might love Malta, but really, or rather, wait, this might get too political. I must love summer and I hate winter. Maybe this would be, I hope this is like, neutral enough. So if I see a post about summer, I'll like it, I'll share, I'll engage with it. Engaging is even, when you're scrolling and you stop and you zoom in, that's also of engagement. If I share the post with friends, that's engagement. But I might also see a post about winter. I hate winter. I hate winter and I hate people who love winter, for example, right? I'll also engage with that. So Facebook couldn't care less if I love summer or hate winter. The point is I've engaged with both types of content. So I will be shown both types of content. If anything, I'll be shown more content that I don't like, because that guarantees more engagement. We know for a fact that we engage more with content that we disagree with, right? So I'm going to be shown more and more and more extreme content in order for me to remain engaged. After a while, I think, that everybody loves winter. People who love winter are horrible. And now I start hating winter people. And I want to, really make my voice heard. I think I've said enough that you can apply this argument to other, more sensitive, more political issues, right? So again, realize how even the process of asking what is the tool's goal, how does the tool function, to a tool like AI is, a tool like Facebook is really important and not very simple to get to. How do I do this? How do I understand what is the tool's goal? How does the tool function? Do I have to read the terms and conditions on each app? If you have nothing better to do with your time, be my guest. But I think there are easier ways, right? So go online, look at reviews on YouTube, on the internet, on Google, right? See what maybe your colleagues have said about these tools, right? Unfortunately, this involves some research and some trial and error, right? You might use a tool and realize you have to pay money for it. You realize you have to give data in order to be able to use that. So you have to do a bit of research beforehand before you kind of start using a tool, right? So these are the first two questions. What is the tool's goal? How does the tool function? I'll get now to the more meatier questions, right? So the tools we use change us. And I want you to think of this as the side effects of the tools that we use. And the tools that we use change us and affect us in two particular ways, right? First of all, in the interactions we have with each other as human beings, and the interactions we have with machines themselves, right? So let's take the first example, interactions we have with each other, right? So I might have a colleague at work. I might not like them very much, but I'm very courteous, I'm polite, I smile, I wave, I say good morning, and that's okay. I go home, I open, I'm on Facebook, and I see that my colleague is a winter person. They love winter, and I hate this. I can't stand this, right? So I comment, and I say something maybe unkind, something I wouldn't maybe say in person. Of course, because of what I've just explained, now Facebook is showing me so many other people like my colleague who love winter. And I hate this. I'm getting angrier. I'm getting more, because of the barrier of the screen, of the technology that's mediating my interaction, right? I might feel comfortable expressing myself in a way I wouldn't, right, in person. But what happens? This creates a habit, right? And we speak of, in philosophy, the habitus, literally a habit, right? This makes me, I start communicating with others in this way to the point that once I meet my colleague at work or other people like my colleague, I'll speak to him or speak to her with the same arrogance or even, cruel language that I've been using online, right? So the way we deal with each other, we interact with each other through technology affects our interactions outside in the world. So that's one example, right? And we can delve a lot more into this. But there's also maybe a more sinister, if you will, thing or reality to bear in mind, right? Our interactions with certain tools. So some of you who are of a particular generation in Malta, I would imagine also in Canada, over the 90s and early 2000s, we had the Tamagotchi. You might remember the little Japanese pets, digital pets you had, right? So it was like a pet. You had to feed it, you had to look after it. Okay, so that's one thing. Now we have these robot vacuum cleaners, right? Everyone's giving them names. My mother has an old one, so sometimes it falls down the steps and she's like, it's called Molly. And my mother said, Molly fell, we're worried because of Molly, right? So maybe funny examples. But then you saw the video I just showed you, right, from OpenAI. So ChatGPT is speaking to the student in a very human way. It's answering back. Hi, how are you? Yes, you did a great job. Perfect. Well done. You could ask me, whenever you want. So keep this in mind, right? We have, apart from AI tutors, you can go online and you can look for AI doctors, AI lawyers. They tried to do an AI priest, didn't really work. But we now also have AI companions, right? So basically, chatbots you can speak to as a friend, right? Or, well, depending on what you are, maybe more than just a friend. These are tools for adults, but there are also some apps that are also open for adolescents. And frankly, all of these tools have rubbish age verification standards, so they're accessible for everyone. Recently, I just realized that Facebook Messenger also has a function where you could chat with AI chatbots. So these are apps that all of us are using, right? Or a lot of us are using. So you chat with this chatbot, about your day, about whatever. And depending on how much you pay, because obviously a lot of these apps want your money, you might also want to talk about more intimate, have more intimate conversations. There was a particular case, if I'm not mistaken, in the US, where this particular company had a functionality, users were talking with the chatbot, even in very intimate terms. The company itself became worried by the content that was being created. So the company informed its users that, within a while, this service will stop. Once the service stopped, a good number of individuals reported issues of bereavement, grief, loss, separation, heartbreak. Right? So these are psychological issues or psychological or emotional responses that we would normally have with another human being. But these people are exhibiting these same responses with these tools, right? Now, bear in mind, these are people who weren't deceived when they started chatting, thinking they're chatting with a real human being on the other side of the planet. They knew when they paid, right? Unfortunately, because of my research, I was having an argument with someone, and I looked at how many AI girlfriends you could download for free. Now, obviously, all my ads on Facebook are AI girlfriends, right? So, yeah. That's where I am right now. But what astounds me in all of these ads is the word AI is very clearly advertised, right? This is a plus. You can have your AI girlfriend and you can speak to her or boyfriend or whatever, right? Speak to her, speak to him, speak to, whenever you want, whatever you want, at your leisure, right? And now we're seeing these expressions, right? So this should cause us to worry, right? This should cause us to worry. What do we do now? What do we know now? So I told you, I warned you beforehand that this might get a little bit dark, right? So let's pause with the darkness for a while. I want to leave this conversation here. I'll just, in the next slide or two, I want to get another strand, a different strand, and in a couple of slides, I'll tie these two strands together, right? So bear with me, please. Normally in discussions on AI, we hear about upskilling, reskilling, and deskilling. Normally we refer to these discussions with regards to technical skills. You're worried AI will take your job, so you study more, you upskill, right, for job security. AI has taken your job, and therefore you learn a new profession altogether. You re-skill, right? Or deskilling, we've seen deskilling, for example, over the course of the Industrial Revolution, right? We had so many carpenters and blacksmiths, right, before the Industrial Revolution. Today, with the miracle of flat-packed furniture, finding a real carpenter, a real woodworker is almost impossible, right? So that's an example of deskilling. These are technical skills. These are technical skills. At this point, I would normally try to rage the teachers that I speak to by telling them the following two questions. I say, is it true that the only thing you do with students is impart content? And they think about this, they say, no, we do more. I say, okay, do you just impart content and technical skills? And they stop about this, say, no, we do more. right? And I push them. What is the more that you do? And then we start digging, and they say, well, we teach students how to share. We teach them personal hygiene if they're in elementary school. We teach them how to negotiate conflict. We teach them how to respect authority, how to take pride in their work, how to work as a group. We teach them how to be diligent or persevere or persistent. We teach them how to voice their emotions or express their emotions in a safe way, right? That's healthy for them and not harmful for others, right? So this is a host of different skills, right, that ideally over the course of education students learn, right, which help them. I love to use this phrase by St. John Bosco, in order to make sure that these students become holy Christians and good citizens, right? We teach students, ideally, any good Catholic school worth its salt, right, gives content, technical skills, but also what we call moral skills. And the risk of these AI tools, when used improperly, is precisely what is called moral de-skilling. As a brackets, moral de-skilling is not a term created by the church, because you might see the word moral there. It's used outside in the literature outside of the church. So moral skills are all these things. Think of interpersonal skills, human skills, communication skills. These are moral skills. We learn moral skills through interactions with moral agents, i.e. with people, right? The image I want you to have in here is, well, at least in Malta, we have many beaches, right, or many bays. We have pebbles by the beach. The pebbles you see by the beach, by the sea, are all very smooth. How are they smooth? They are smooth because they have spent time rubbing against each other. Equally so, students become beautiful and smooth, to run with the expression, if they rub with each other, if they rub in interactions, right, in human interactions, interpersonal interactions with other students, with their educators, and with their parents at home, in all the other areas, right? This is how we gain moral skills. The problem is here. AI tools are not moral agents, and therefore AI tools are not good tools in order that can help impart these moral skills to students, right? We know for a fact, for example, that these AI chatbots are sycophantic. So what does this word mean? Sycophantic means someone who's trying to really agree with you, right? So this is really not a good friend or companion to have. If I have a horrible opinion about something or someone, a good friend, will take me to the side and say, Jean, that's a horrible thing. You should really, evaluate your choices. Or if I'm going to make a choice, for example, that's harmful to me, a good friend will stop me and say, I disagree with you. I think this is wrong, right? These tools just say, good idea, great, fantastic. We have screenshots of these AI tools, individuals who take medication for mental health issues, and people typing in, I've decided to stop taking my medication in order to start a personal journey of self-discovery. And any self-respecting individual would say, I think you should discuss this with a healthcare professional, right, before you make this great step, right? But these tools are saying, I'm so proud of you, right? That's so great that you're doing that. You could use any horrible opinion or any weird or any harmful, right, opinion or choice or decision, and these tools will just agree with you, right? Equally so, we can use kind of other ways, other examples in which these tools are really not good at teaching these moral skills. So this is, I think, the slide with these questions. In order to avoid the problematic things I've mentioned on that slide about the side effects, about how technology affects our interactions with each other, and how we grow because of our interactions with technology itself, with the machines themselves, right? We need to be wary of the moral skills, the moral formation of students, frankly, of all of us, right? So these are some questions. These are really important questions that I'd like you to ask yourself whenever you're coming across a new AI tool, right? So which skills will this tool develop? Which skills will be hindered? Which new skills need to be trained? And which skills should we ensure that students have regardless of the tools that are being used? Strictly speaking, we could apply these questions even to technical skills, right? So I'll give you an example. Presumably, the system in Canada was similar to the system in Malta. in Malta, before calculators, students had logbooks, right, in order to solve trigonometry questions. I'm assuming you had something similar, right? So once calculators were very widely accessible, it was decided that knowing how to use a logbook was a technical skill we no longer needed to have. I've never used a logbook. I don't know how to use a logbook, right? In a sense, however, I think if we transfer the argument to moral skills, my argument, my opinion is human beings in the 7th century before Christ, in the 14th century AD, or in the 21st century require the same moral skills, right? Which new skills need to be trained? Well, let me give you a simple example, right? Which is both a technical skill, but a moral skill as well. When I was young and I was given a project to do at school, I would either go to the library, the school library, or at home would have this massive set of encyclopedias. Maybe you'd have them as well, right? Whenever I went to the library or opened the encyclopedia, I never had to question or query whether the information I'm reading is true. Today, if you give a student a project about the solar system, they're going to go online, right? Where they're going to find peer-reviewed articles about the planet and blog posts by people who wrongly believe that the Earth is flat. So from a young age now, students need to already have the skill of discerning, right? What is this content? Where is it coming from? Who is saying this, whatever they're saying, right? So this seems to be a new skill, not really a new skill per se, but a new skill that we need to train much earlier, right? Yeah. So again, I'm very happy to kind of open up this discussion when we move into the Q&A in 1 or 2 slides. I think the last point I wanted to say is just what is the church saying about all of this? So the church is saying a lot. This is like a really quick buffet of what the church is saying. Normally the church, the Catholic Church, tends to be like 20 years late to a technological innovation. This is really not the case with AI, right? So yeah, you have their messages by Pope Francis. We're waiting. Rumors are that within a few, imminently, we should have an encyclical by Pope Leo on related to AI. Those are the rumors, which, yeah, we'll see. Pope Francis was the first pope to speak at the G7, right, about 2 summers ago, and he spoke about AI. Apart from papal documents, there are also a lot of other areas of the church where AI is being discussed and reflected upon, right? So I'll just choose 2 or 3 things, and then I can conclude, and then we'll move on to the questions. Right. The Rome call for AI ethics. I'll just want to highlight the date here. February 28, 2020, a full 2.5 years before ChatGPT was launched, the church was already realizing that, look, AI is going to be big. It's going to affect different strata of society. We need to do something about it. There isn't legislation, so really we need to at least propose ethical safeguards, ethical principles that people can agree to follow. This was what the Rome call is. I invite you all of you to look at these documents in greater detail on your own time. This is a very technical document aimed for businesses, right? Again, I show this just to show you that the church isn't really talking about, abstract AI, but also really where the rubber hits the road kind of stuff. This is a document by the American AI Research Group that was published January 2024. You could download it for free. They now also have a second publication that came out a few months ago about agency. I am part of the European group, as you might have heard. Hopefully our publication about anthropology and Catholic social teaching will come out at the end of summer. We're doing the last work. So again, this is the work of different academics trying to reflect from a Catholic point of view, what do we have to say about AI, right? This is Father Paolo Benanti. He's a monk, he's a lecturer, he's also a consultant at Microsoft. Again, just one example, just to show that the church is really, he was also on a UN panel. He was at the Council of Europe. He's no longer there. In fact, I've replaced him at this role at the Council of Europe. So Father Benanti is doing a lot of work at these really high level areas. He was also advisor to Pope Francis for that. I'll just finish with this one quote, which this is and I'll conclude here, in fact. This is a quote from Pope Francis, his 2024 message for the World Day of Peace, 1st of January, 2024. This is at the concluding part of that message. And Pope Francis said this: education in the use of forms of AI should aim above all at promoting critical thinking. Users of all ages, but especially the young, need to develop a discerning approach to the use of data and content collected on the web or produced by AI systems. Schools, universities, and scientific societies are challenged to help students and professionals to grasp the social and ethical aspects of the development and uses of technology. So I hope this is what I try to do today, and I hope this is also maybe, you know, the call for those of you who haven't started and those of you who have already started to carry on in this journey of understanding the deeper effects of AI. Again, to be able to use it in a way that helps us, to help make us more human, and to avoid the ways that might be more damaging to us, and to use it properly. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions that you have.
Thank you, Father Gové. That was wonderful, and it's inspired a lot of thinking and
okay. So
and
Don,
reflecting.
unfortunately, I can't hear. So let's see how we can do this.
How's
Should
that?
I leave the chat and join very quickly?
Yeah, I think so. Let's
Yeah.
try that.
Okay, be there in 1 minute. Hi.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about
Excellent.
that.
No. Thank you so much. There's so many questions that have popped up because of your presentation. So here's one. 40 years ago in Ontario, we talked about the idea of media literacy and what would be the framework for an ethical consideration of any piece of media. And you spoke about that framework for critical thinking at the very end of your presentation. Can you, and I know this is a tough one, but what would be some of the elements that you would say should be included in any kind of framework where we're asking students to engage and reflect critically on AI in schools?
All right, so I think there are two ways to tackle this. So obviously, I apologize beforehand because this can't be a comprehensive answer, right?
No.
So I think if we're going to say, what do we need to ensure that students know, right? So that's one way of looking at it when they're using these tools. And I think, first of all, becoming familiar with the tool, with these different tools, and therefore knowing the limitations, right? And this could be integrated. So something the government here is trying to do in different ways is integrating kind of digital literacy or AI literacy across the board in different subjects. So a simple example would be an English teacher could still ask students to write a summary, right, in the old school way, right?
Right.
But the teacher could also decide, for example, to create a summary from a long text using ChatGPT, give the long text and the summary to students, and ask them to critique it. Right. So in a sense, you're instilling within the students this idea that, well, you know, this tool isn't as great as it's made out to be, for example, right? Because, for example, in making a summary, the machine makes certain decisions, certain biased decisions, right? Whereas I might maybe have kept particular facts that I believe are salient that students wouldn't have done that, right? So that's maybe, yeah, those would be, I think, giving students familiarity with how the tool works and therefore what its limitations are. In the process, I would hope that, you know, part of critical thinking is the empowerment that students have, that actually, you know, I'm better than the machine, right? I can make certain decisions and I should be able to rely on my own judgment and not offload that judgment to the machine. When it comes to maybe the ethical framework from a school point of view, I really just go back to basics. So for me, the basics are flourishing, our dignity, our agency, and human flourishing, right? And flourishing, as we understand as Catholics, is related to perfection, holiness, right? Whichever word you want to use. So in a sense, is this helping is the way we're using the tools, the way we're giving tools to students, the way we're structuring our education, our assignments, our assessments, etc. Is it conducive to the holistic formation of students, helping their current and one would hope also eventual flourishing? Maybe another comment related to flourishing is the concept of vocation. Now, obviously, I mean this outside of becoming a priest or married life. The Vatican published in March last month. The ITC means it means the International Theological Commission, basically the big gurus of theologians for the Vatican, published this document on transhumanism and posthumanism called Quo Vadis Humanitas. And they say kind of one of the problems is we have a culture of a vocation, non-vocation, kind of the lack of vocation. So vocation is kind of this idea of how am I going to be of service to my fellow human beings? How am I going to contribute to society to build up a better world, right? To build God's kingdom here on earth, if you will, right? And I think that really, so our dignity, our flourishing, but the fact that my flourishing, in a sense, comes when I help others flourish in my profession, in my job, in my life state, if I'm married or a priest or a nun or whatever. So I think Catholic schools need to really now dig deeper into what the fundamental anthropological view that we believe in order to be able to convey it even more in a world where this kind of concept of humanity is becoming more and more maybe liquid or shady. I don't know if that maybe properly answers the question.
No, that's wonderful. I want to follow that up with something that I know it happened in another country today. I can't remember which one, but I know Australia is the best example. They've put limits on when young people can begin to engage in social media. Do you see such a limit perhaps occurring in the use of AI? For example, with, would you see a limit, for example, when students in a school setting should be allowed to engage in AI?
Yeah, okay. So if I'm not mistaken, there's a UNESCO document, which is, I use the word fairly old. I think it's 2023, which I think kind of suggested that students below the age of 13 shouldn't be unsupervised when using these tools. Now, this is just one document. The problem is, so I think there should be some sort of limitation. And I really want to emphasize, I don't speak of limitation in terms of a ban or anything of that, but I think it's the whole question of ensuring that students have the proper and adequate cognitive formation in order to be able to handle these tools. So for example, during my doctoral work, I worked on virtual reality, VR tools, right? So virtual reality as a technology is a bit older. So we already now know through extensive research in VR that children below the age of 6 should never be given the headset goggles for virtual reality, because below the age of 6, they do not have the conceptual apparatus to distinguish between a real table or a virtual table.
Right.
Now, that took some time. Unfortunately, the AI tools we have now are rapidly evolving, and also kind of really with no limitations whatsoever. So, for example, I would question at what age, for example, would a child know the difference between chatting with a real human being and chatting with a chatbot? I mean, some people still struggle to do that. So I think there should be some sort of maybe gradual introduction to AI tools. If you had to ask me for a hard age, I feel cautious. I'm not fully comfortable saying precisely because I think there really needs to be more research, and there is more research being carried out, and we need to wait for that. But I think at the meantime, we should be maybe slightly more. I would venture to say we should err on the side of caution than not. So definitely not to withhold introducing students to these tools, because they're already using these tools at home, and in the world of work or as they progress in life, they're going to be using these tools. But I think to do this in a measured way, in a safe way, in a way that they can question and realize how best to use these tools.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of draw back a little bit outside of a school setting and maybe in a larger social setting. You mentioned the relationship between the ChatGPT and its ownership company, which leads to a question. Social media has money-making goals, as does AI. What concerns do you have about the impact of AI, for example, on jobs, on the economy, and really on maybe on civic engagement.
Okay, so big impact, but I would treat these as two separate things. So the impact
Yep.
of AI jobs and the economy is one issue, civic engagement is the other. So I think, let me start with civic engagement. I think the worry there is, I mean, we have seen success stories with regard to social media. So for example, the Arab Spring was successful because of kind of the communication that was allowed through social media. So social media kind of initially promised this kind of democratization, so to speak, of voicing your opinion. I would venture to say the social media we have today isn't really that anymore, right? Today, because of the recommendation algorithms that's there, we know that all of these platforms either themselves create AI-generated content or just allow other users to kind of create themselves and push AI-generated content. I mean, I would venture to ask any of you now listening to open your Facebook account, scroll through your feed, and I would bet about 50% of the content you see aren't your friends or relatives or family. It's just AI stuff or content you have not subscribed to, but Facebook kind of thinks that you will engage with, right? So the worry is we are going to become more individualized, more siloed in. I mean, some of these big AI gurus promise us a world where life will become so comfortable that we don't even need to meet. My AI will talk to your AI, and it's like, instead of this could have been an email, our AIs will deal with it. So this is the utopia that they present to us. But I would think it's great that we get to meet, we get to waste time together, right? Which is what we do when we're with friends, with people that we love. So I worry for civic engagement. I think that we're going to see a lot more indifference, a lot more apathy, which will also then lead to, which we're seeing around the world, kind of using these tools for manipulating elections or political outcomes. So that's one worry I have, I think. Jobs and the economy. So I think here, I'll be honest, I'm a bit more hopeful, but hopeful if safeguards are in place. So look, jobs are going to change. Some jobs that already exist will no longer exist, but at the same time, new jobs will be created, right? It's not like there's a finite amount of jobs and AI is eating into that, right? The issue here, obviously, that we have to tackle is, first of all, are the next generation, so to speak, the generation still in schooling, being adequately prepared for that? And I think more or less we're doing that, or they're also doing it by themselves. Maybe the worry is also for people who are already in the workforce and might feel a bit harder to feel it more difficult to pick up new skills that they need in order to pivot into whatever the fluidity would be. So I'd like to see maybe more governments, for example, taking on board, for example, as an archdiocese in Malta, we've published our position paper in terms of economy and jobs. We said, look, the state has to intervene, at least to offer, to ensure that there's kind of this adequate training now, either offered by the state or offered by companies that themselves are turning to AI tools, to automation. Right? In a sense, we have to, all right, people have to fend for themselves, but at the same time, we have to also offer the tools for people in order for them to be able to remain competitive and able to find kind of whatever jobs will be present 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. Maybe one bracket here is I'm very much of the opinion that these moral skills will become more and more and more important in the world of work tomorrow, right? I think we're already finding ways that tools can automate certain jobs. The human element is the thing that is really making a kind of a step above in the jobs that remain or the jobs that are present right now, right? So the human element is really going to be the moral skills, moral training, therefore, is going to become, it should have always been important, but it'll become more. If we manage to get by before and, wasn't really causing a problem, now it's going to be even more important that we have well-formed, well-rounded individuals.
Thank you. You mentioned siloing, and that led to an interesting thought. 2 years ago, the American Surgeon General wrote a really poignant article about his own loneliness that he really saw coming out of COVID. And he saw it as an epidemic, and he classified it as the epidemic of loneliness. Do you see AI contributing to that loneliness? Do you see any possibility that it alleviates any of that loneliness?
Unfortunately, I'm gonna, and I hate sounding like the negative person here, but I think overall, I think it contributes to the loneliness. I mean, and again, this is not, again, I really want to emphasize, I'm not anti-technology. So
No.
when I was studying abroad, because I had the tools that I had at my disposal, speaking with other priests, when they were studying abroad, they got a phone call back home once a month because it was so expensive, right? A very quick phone call just to say, they're still alive. Every other evening or every evening, I would video call my parents while I'm cooking, or my friends back home, right? And the pandemic showed us ways in which technology could also help us to remain connected. But again, this was a substitute because we couldn't do with the real thing, right? Ideally, we are together. But at times, unfortunately, as human beings, we tend to have a tendency to prefer efficiency over authenticity. So going out, I mean, I like to use this example with dating because of the AI companies that I mentioned. I mean, putting yourself out there in the dating scene, talking to somebody and trying to, get to know them, becoming vulnerable, it's really hard work, right? It's so much easier to have an AI companion. You log on, you talk to the AI companion when you're feeling lonely, and when you're done, you just switch off the television, your computer, right? So it's so much more efficient. But I would venture to say, it's efficient, but at what cost, right? So I worry because of these tools offering us great efficiency in so many factors, I think this will lead to a greater loneliness, I think.
Thank you. For students with special needs, how would AI help bridge the gaps in their learning and understanding? Students who may not be able to discern proper information, for example.
So I think this is one of the massive positives, for example, of AI tools. So for example, I speak with educators, and the possibility of certain AI tools allow them to really prepare tailor-made resources or adapt the resources they already have to students with different, for example, learning abilities. If it's, or even beyond different learning abilities, even, for example, so for example, in Malta, sometimes we have this phenomenon of, so Maltese is the main language, English also. We might have students who have moved to the country, right? Their family have moved in. So language would be a bit of a barrier. So these tools offer fantastic, ways which we can bridge that gap. But again, depending how it's used and ensuring that we're using it in the right way. So offering this help in terms of adapting material, in terms of kind of maybe also offering, let's take maybe a simple example of a student who struggles with mathematical concept, using these tools to keep on training in order to hone in, that would be great, right? As long as we remain aware of not offloading the moral formation, the moral skills onto these tools. As long as we're using these tools for apprehension of content, or even apprehension to some degree or other of technical skills, I think that's great.
Thank you. This is not a question. This is a comment from one of the people who are listening to your lecture. Resilience is the skill ability that is hindered by AI. When we engage with AI instead of others around us, we remove the friction that helps us to build a resilience to challenge. What would be your reaction to that comment?
Yeah, I mean, friction takes me back to that example of the pebbles that rub together, right? So yeah, I mean, at times relationships are a bit messy, are a bit difficult, but it really is in that way that we kind of grow. I mean, let's take an example that has nothing to do with AI. I know, I've heard of couples, right? Young couples, teenagers, for example, right? They'll have a bit of an argument, but they won't finish that argument together. They'll go home separately, and they'll text each other to finish the argument, because texting allows me the space to formulate my thought, to rewrite it, maybe to put it through ChatGPT and put it back. But what I'm losing there is the ability to maybe control my emotions, if I'm a bit angry or a bit hurt, right? and still find a way to express myself in a proper way. So that's maybe not exactly like resilience, but I think there's an adjacent argument there. So yeah, obviously efficiency maybe is one of the enemies, if you will, of resilience. In the same way, we do resistance training, right? We add weights to carry, so we'll be much quicker when we're running without the weights, right?
Right.
So unfortunately, these weights that education should be there, right? These weights are being removed, so we're not really training ourselves as much. Yeah.
Great. A question. Has the church commented on the dilemma posed by the excessive energy consumption associated with AI?
Yes. If I'm not mistaken, there were comments made on in Antiqua et Nova. Yeah, but I would venture to say that also, in a sense, quite happily, or rather positively speaking, the church has also been speaking about kind of the effect of technology in a wider sense on the environment before the specific debate on AI. So I'm thinking here of Pope Francis's great emphasis on ecology more widely, but also on the environment more specifically. So the church has kind of been highlighting this throughout, even before the discussion maybe centered more on energy usage or resource usage with regards to AI. I mean, part of this argument as well, if we want to widen it, is the resource extraction that we need, the resource that we're extracting in order to make the tools that we need, the hardware that we need for these tools. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you. It's interesting. There's a comment here that from, I would assume, a teacher saying, your messaging lends the energy to continue to spread similar messaging here in Ontario. This teacher has talked about the idea of de-skilling, cognitive offloading, but not moral de-skilling. So for that, he thanks you very much. That's an added thing. And so for this, that was our final comment and question of our engagement. I want to thank you so much for this, not just for the talk, but your ability to just respond, not just with insight, but in a way that's so applicable to who we are as teachers, as educators, as parents. It's not just the academic insight that you have, but it's how it can be applicable to who we are. So for that, I appreciate the dialogue. Thank you.
Very happy to be with you all. Thank you very much.
I will turn this over to Nick.
Thank you very much, Father Jean. But thank you also to the audience for joining us this evening. And then thank you for the excellent questions that were posed to Father John. Don Walker, thank you for facilitating the question and answer. Carmela La Rosa, who set up the event on StreamYard, but also to Lori DeMarco, who found us our keynote speaker for this evening. But most importantly, thank you, Father Jean, for joining us this evening and for staying up late. It's 2 o'clock in the morning in Malta, and I know Father told us that he has to be up for Mass at 7. So good luck. But it's great to hear about the important work that you're doing in your diocese, but also the work you're undertaking at the European AI group at the Vatican. Very important, and we will continue to keep you in our prayers. Thank you for illustrating some of the shortcomings of AI and the tools and balancing that with the power of the tool. I think it was important for us to realize tonight when you said we have to discern by asking questions or interrogating the tool. And we are fortunate that we are able to use the lens of our Catholic faith in using our critical skills to do that. So it's also great to hear that the church is going to be involved and perhaps an encyclical to come out soon. So we would welcome that discernment and that guidance from the church. So before I let you go, on the screen, if anyone's taking a photo, it's a shameless plug for a reminder that we have our 50/50 raffle that you can participate in via our website or with the QR code showing on the screen. The 50/50 will take place on May 5th, and the winner will be notified on that day. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you for the board of directors who have participated this evening, and thank you for everyone who has assisted making this production such an eventful night. And good luck and sweet dreams, Father John. Okay, take care. Thank you so much for being with us.